if you get into a bidding war, make sure it's a bidding war. You're just driving the price up. We saw this last year, Drew, in the Kings Classic, where somebody was just driving up the price on a quarterback. They already had a quarterback, right? So now they ended up with two high-priced quarterbacks. So I think it was like Lamar and like Burrow or something like that.
That's a mortal sin.
You can't do it.
It's a mortal sin in a snake draft. It's way worse in an auction draft.
What?
Why are you shaking your head? You're welcome.
All across the fantasy universe. What's up, everybody? Welcome to Fantasy Football Daily here at FantasyPoints.com. And no, you're not mistaken. I am not Theo Greminger. I am Brian Drake, joined alongside the managing editor of FantasyPoints.com, Mr. Joe Dolan. And Joe, we're kind of making this auction show a little bit of an annual tradition as you and I sit down with our favorite auction buddy from Football Guys, the great Drew Davenport. From the Auction Brief podcast, and we're going to bring him in a second. But thanks for kind of keeping this going, Joe. You're the man behind. You're like the Wizard of Oz here, keeping it going. So thanks for doing this. And I know you're a big auction fan, and I know a lot of our listeners are way into this because the numbers for this every single year climb and climb and climb. So baby, let's get ready to talk some auction drafts.
Yeah, I mean, it's great, Drake, and it's great being with Drew as well. We needed to hammer it out a little bit earlier this year, guys, because by the time you were listening to this, I might be in the UK. I'm heading to see Oasis this year. I'm going to see Oasis at Wembley Stadium. So that's why we're recording it here a little bit earlier in July. But I want to get the advice out to the people, right? We need to get the advice out to the people before I go see the Gallagher brothers. Hopefully, before they start hating each other again.
Yeah, don't look back in anger at us as we could get a lot of puns in here, a lot of lines, Joe.
Yeah, well, we're gonna have to move at a supersonic pace to get all the information in that we need to.
I like it. All right, so let's bring him in. The man, the myth, the legend, the great Drew Davenport, two-time Kings Classic auction winner, and Drew does pay me to say that, from the Kings Classic draft at the Pro Football Hall of Fame at the Fantasy Football Expo. You can see him at Drew Davenport FF. And also, hey, by the way, people also know you, Drew, for all this legal talk that you've got going on the interwebs, whether it's Quinshon Judkins or Tyreek Hill, whoever it is, give Drew a follow at Drew Davenport FF on TikTok and X. So you do this Auction Brief podcast. We love it. We see all the big names that you have on there. You give us a few minutes here to talk to our Fantasy Points audience. And what we're going to do today is we're going to talk a little bit about early, middle, and late draft strategies. And we're going to incorporate tiers because I'll let you kind of take the wheel here, Drew. For folks maybe just getting into this and they're not super up on auction drafts, tiers matter a lot, right?
Yeah, I tell everybody that I don't care so much about my rankings as I care about the tiers. So really, that sounds like those two things are in fighting with each other, but they're not, because it's just a group. Tiers are just a group of players that you consider to be similarly priced or have similar value. And the reason for the tiers and why it's so much more important in auction drafting is that when you get into the auction, you're going to know that you're going to need to know that the prices are going to be affected by what's available in each of the tiers. So that's why it's the most important thing to do before you get started, because you'll know, hey, I still need a wide receiver 2, and this tier is drying up fast. And if I wait too long, the price is going to get overinflated. So, we've talked about that ad nauseum, but that's just a brief overview of the fact that I don't care how you have them ranked inside the tier. Like, that stuff doesn't matter to me, because I think for the most part, you need to be agnostic about what you think about most guys. If you get too dialed in or drilled down, like I'm going to get this guy, that's when you make mistakes or overpay. So just be agnostic, have those tiers and say, I got to get one from this tier, and make sure that you get in before it gets scarce in the tiers.
Drake, one of the things that people always say about auctions, and or salary cap leagues, by the way, let's also throw that out there. If you're wondering what we're talking about, ESPN, Yahoo, some other sites will call them a salary cap league. One of the things about tiers that you need to hammer, and this is a great draft prep tool, because I think if you're getting into an auction or salary cap draft for the first time, one of the things you're going to do, you might be checking out a show just like this. Hey, I've never done this before. This is different. I need to know what to do. And you also might print out like a cheat sheet of values. We have one up at FantasyPoints for $200 is the standard auction salary cap. But you can adjust it based on we have an interactive auction tool as well for Excel that you can adjust, and that'll adjust the values for you. But when Drew brings up tiers, here's what's really important to note about that. We say one of the cliches about auctions is, oh, you can get any player. If you get the 11th pick in your snake draft, you're not getting Saquon Barkley this year, right? If in an auction draft, you have a clean slate, you can bid on any player you want. But really, that's not necessarily true, because you have a finite amount of money to spend in the auction. And unless everybody's asleep at the wheel, you're not going to get Saquon Barkley for $60 and Ashton Genty for $3. It's not going to happen. So you are going to be limited in what you can do once you actually spend some money. But here's an important thing to note. Let's just say I know I'm not getting Saquon Barkley with the 11th pick in my standard redraft snake draft. That means that Ashton Genty is almost certainly going to go after Saquon Barkley in most snake drafts. 11 is about where he's going in best ball right now, give or take. But there is going to be a chance in your auction draft that Ashton Genty is going to go for more money than Saquon Barkley. And let me explain that to you. Because as Drew pointed out, you have to know when you're operating within a tier, how much you think the room is valuing players in that tier, and how much you think the room is going to be aggressive in pursuing players in that tier. So if Saquon Barkley is the first player off the board, and players can be nominated in any order in an auction draft, if Saquon Barkley is nominated as the first player off the board, and then all of a sudden, maybe Derrick Henry comes off the board, and McCaffrey, Bijan Robinson comes off the board, Jahmyr Gibbs, they all come off the board, and then everybody in the room who doesn't have an RB1, who wants one, is staring at Ashton Genty and has identified him as the last guy they feel comfortable with as a number one running back. He could actually end up going for more money than all of those guys, because you get into a bidding war. So I am, Drew, and you can obviously put your feelings out here, but I like to operate at the beginning or the middle of a projected tier. If I want a player in a certain tier and I want to lock down that player before I engage in a bidding war, at least at the beginning of my draft, before I engage in a bidding war to get the last player in a perceived tier.
Yeah, let me say the one thing that I want to hone in on there that you said that I love is, what is the room's value of the players in that tier? Because a lot of times people approach this like it's a vacuum. Like, oh, I went into the draft and I thought that this particular player was going to be $52 and this player was going to be $54. None of that matters when you get in the room if the room itself isn't placing the same value on that position. And I use the example of, I have a home league where we're a full flex and we only have to start one of every position. So what it ends up doing is it tanks the RB2 market. There's just no demand because those are just depth players and nobody really cares about starting them. So RB2s are really cheap. So if you go in there and you're like, I have this value on Alvin Kamara because he's an RB2, you're going to be sorely mistaken. So I love what you said there, and I don't want it to go by, because it's really important that you remember, when you're in the auction, just take some time and see how the people in the room are treating each of the tiers before you jump in with both feet. And that helps you to just properly gauge where that's going to fall for the draft.
Drew, let me ask you, before we really start breaking down tiers and talking about a couple of players here, you have kind of put your stamp on the auction industry with your par sheet talk. Just explain to folks the par sheet quickly, what it is, why they should be using it, and how it's going to help them be a better, more effective auction draft player.
Yeah, it's a term that I just sort of came up with when I was doing this job at the very beginning, because I wanted to come up with something that said what it was that I had been doing all these years. And I've been doing this long before I became a content creator. And I called it the par sheet because in an auction draft, your goal is to shoot exactly par. In golf, of course, we want to shoot under par. but you don't want to, in an auction draft, you want to spend all your money. And of course, you're not allowed to shoot over par because you only have $200. So what I said was, I want to come up with a specific set of values for every position on my roster. Now, I realize this is not a popular strategy with analysts, and there's a reason for that. And I've said this over and over, that if you're an analyst that does a lot of auctions, knows what you're doing, you're familiar with values, or you're familiar with the league that you're in, you don't necessarily have to do this, because coming up with specific values isn't necessary. You're good enough to roll on the fly and do it without that crutch. But I liken it to this. I say that a par sheet is like having training wheels that you never have to take off. Because when you put specific values that you want to spend, on my RB1, I want to spend 46. On my wide receiver 1, I want to spend 55. On my wide receiver 2, I want to spend 31. When you put those specific values down, a lot of people say, well, isn't that making you more rigid? Isn't that making you feel like you're locked into that number? And I say, actually, it's quite the opposite. It makes me more flexible, because then once I land a player at that position, let's say I had 50 for my wide receiver 1 and I landed a $46 player, it allows me to be more flexible, because I know I got $4 now that I can play with, and I can kind of stick it somewhere else. And if I overspend, it's cool. Your sheet doesn't tell you have to stay there. Your sheet tells you, if I spend this and I had allotted this, I either need to make up this amount or I can play with this amount. I think it allows you to be more flexible. And so I say that with most casual auction drafters, most of the people out there have done less than 20 of these live in their life. I would venture to say the majority of people have done less than 20, certainly less than 30 or 40 in their entire life. So this is a really nice little guardrail that keeps you on track. And I have a lot of questions every year. The questions get louder and louder about, can I get your take on my par sheet before I go into my draft? And so I realize it's a really popular thing with casual players going into home leagues. And I understand why analysts don't like it, but I still think it's important for the masses.
So let me follow up on that, and let me relate that to the tiers discussion as well. Let's use the example that we just talked about, the Ashton Genty example, where maybe he's the running back at the beginning of your draft. And I'm really talking beginning of draft strategies, because as Drew knows, these things change pretty heavily once you get to the middle and to the back end of your auction draft. But let's just say it's like the first 2 or maybe even 3 rounds of nominations. And Ashton Genty is that guy who everybody's kind of identified as the last RB1 in that tier, and that money is creeping up, and it's good, and it's getting, that those bids are coming in fast and furious, and it's going to be a bidding war. That is one where Drew and his flexibility is coming in. Let's just say, Drew, on your par sheet, you budgeted $55 for an RB1. Well, Barkley, McCaffrey, whoever you put in that tier, Bijan, they're all off the board, and they went for $69, $70, $71. And then all of a sudden, Ashton Genty's getting into the $70, $75 range, and you're like, whoa, 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 whoa. Just because I said I wanted to budget $55 for my RB1, I'm not spending $75 because the entire room is there. That's the part of the par sheet. Reallocate that $55. Maybe instead of going with an RB1, you now go with 2 wide receiver ones, because the cool thing about the auction draft is, guys, the money is finite. Everybody I've never been in an auction where there was uneven auction budgets. I'm sure some crazy league out there exists where maybe you traded for auction money, but we're just talking about what your standard going to do. The money is finite. So if your league mates are spending $70 on an RB1, that's $70 they're not going to have to spend on a wide receiver one or a tight end one. And we'll get into the Bowers McBride discussion as well, or quarterback one, depending on what your format is. So that's where you have to react and say, all right, everybody spent $70 on running backs. Well, they can't do it on wide receivers too. So that's where I'm going to reallocate my focus. So it allows you, as Drew said, to maybe explore a different roster construction than you were planning on.
Drew, let's start the draft off, okay? Auctioneer or a computer program goes off, and that's a whole nother program. I want to ask you guys if you know any good programs to run an auction on, because it's a question that I get in my DMs all the time. But all right, we're off and running, Drew, okay? All right, I have the first nomination of the draft. Do I want to throw out somebody that I really want? Do I want to throw out somebody that I want to spend a lot of money on? Or am I saying, you know what? let me throw out somebody I don't really care about, maybe in the same tier. So, like, say, that running back tier we just talked about, you don't really love Genty, okay? Because you consider him a back half of that tier guy. Do you throw him out first? Do you throw CMC out first? Because he's going to be the linchpin of all fantasy drafts this year, I'm telling you. What do you want to do early?
Well, my early strategy is a little bit different than a lot of people's, but I really believe in it because over the years of doing this, I think the most important thing is finding out where you're going in the draft. You only get a finite amount of nominations during the draft, and those nominations are part of what you can control. And so, something I say in my show all the time: control what you can control. And nominations are one of the biggest things that you have at your fingertips to sort of steer the draft. The draft, I liken it to like a big aircraft carrier. Like, you can't do a whole lot when you spin the wheel. Like, obviously, I'm not a Navy guy. You can tell this, right? But you can't do a whole lot. Like, the aircraft carrier is going to move very slowly. But those nominations are your chance to do that. So don't waste them. And so early in a draft, particularly in the top half of that first round, if I get a top 5-ish nomination, I'm trying to sneak somebody through who everybody is going to just kind of just shrug their shoulders a little bit. And everyone has their full caps. And I have probably referenced this to you guys before in past years. I call it the sitting down bonus. When you sit down, you're starting out in an auction, people get very nervous to spend their money at the very beginning.
Mm-hmm.
This may not last very long. It may not last more than 4 or 5 nominations. It may not last more than 2 or 3. But there's always a moment in the room where people don't want to spend money, and it's on a higher level player. So I'm going to try to nominate somebody. I'm not going to try to nominate Bijan. I'm not going to try to nominate Jamar Chase. I'm going to try to nominate somebody a little bit further down, Puka Nacua, Drake London, somebody like that, and hope that I get a little discount at the very beginning of the draft. That's in the top half of round 1. If I'm in the bottom half of round 1, what I'm doing is I'm nominating a player that's going to be super key to my build. So if I think I'm going to go after, or I want to see if Christian McCaffrey is going to be viable to get for a reasonable price in my draft, I don't want to wait 2 rounds for somebody to call out Christian McCaffrey, because then I may find out that I wanted to go with somebody else. And then McCaffrey comes up and he's too expensive. And now I'm left like, what do I do now? So I'm trying to nominate those guys that are key linchpins on my par sheet, particularly if you're going after the guys at the onesie positions. I think that's real important. So if you're thinking, I want to get Bowers or McBride, I want to get Lamar Jackson, I want to get one of these top guys at the onesie positions, I try to hammer that early, because oftentimes you end up not getting them because they're too expensive. And then you have all this money to spend and there aren't enough players left on the board. You have to get your draft started in the right direction you want it to go. That's what I'm trying to do with nominations in the first probably 2-3 rounds. And then I want to address the other part of your question real quick before I stop rambling here. But the other part of your question was, do I want to nominate somebody that other people will spend some money on? I generally tend to believe that's not that great of a strategy early in a draft. I do think it has its place, and it has its place maybe more in the middle rounds, or maybe as we get into round 4 and 5, where you're trying to let things shape up, or you've spent some money, you're trying to let the draft come back to you. But early in a draft, I submit this argument to you, that if other people in the room are interested in a top level player, don't nominate that player, because there's likely to be several people in that room who are interested in that player. So for instance, everybody wants Jamar Chase now, right? He's going to go for $55, $60. If I leave him on the board and I go after Puka Nacua or Drake London, that means there's maybe 3, 4, 5 people sitting in the room like, I want Jamar Chase. That's tying up, let's say he's a $50 player. He's going to be more than that, but for math's sake, 4 people in the room are saying, I want Jamar Chase. You're tying up $200 of auction cap in people's heads because they're waiting on Jamar Chase. They're not going to fight you as hard for the lower level wide receiver ones at that point. I submit to you that it is a mistake early on to be nominating those top guys hoping to waste cap dollars. That doesn't have a very strong effect on the overall buying power in the room, to think that you're wasting, I just wasted $52 of a player I didn't want. That really doesn't change the buying power in the room that early in the draft. That nomination strategy is better later in the draft, middle rounds, 3/4 of the way through the draft.
Yeah, this is really awesome stuff here from Drew. Real high level, like playing the psychological game, and I've never thought about it from that level, right? Where it, and that's the advantage, Drew, of of being aware of the tiers of players, right? Because if you know Jamar Chase, for some reason everybody played chicken and nobody nominated him, you can go down the board a little bit. You know, maybe even go after his teammate T. Higgins and get him for a perceived discount because everybody's waiting for Jamar Chase. Drake, I want to talk about my general strategy in early drafts, which I think, Drew, you agree is 2 to 3 rounds of nominations that I would consider the early part of the draft. My general thought would be, Drake, I want to get 2 players of that high end. Now, that doesn't mean a first or second round player won't last until the 4th or 5th nomination round, but in general, those players are going to come off the board at the beginning of the draft. I want to leave with like at least 2 players that I feel really good about. And that's going to end up costing me, my estimation is, depending on the room, between 40 and 60% of your auction budget. That might sound like a lot, but you're going to see that the money that comes out of the room early is going to knock down the lower tier players, the cost of those players, quite a bit. But let's get into what I kind of want to do specifically this year. And that's going to really color the 2025 auctions for me. One thing I will definitely be doing in the first 2 or 3 rounds of nominations is making sure some of the elite quarterbacks are nominated, because this is going to dictate what I do. This is going to dictate how I manipulate the room. And this is for 1 quarterback drafts, guys. Superflex is different. We know that Superflex affects Drake. We might do a little video on that a little bit later, honestly, but this is for 1 quarterback drafts. And it's a strategy that I like this year, because I actually think, some might disagree, but I think this is a great year to wait on your quarterback. You know, I think there's some good options in the middle rounds who have both athleticism or some boring veterans like a Matthew Stafford who's on a loaded roster, who you're going to be able to get for $1 or $2 later in your auction. And let me explain this to you this way. When I'm nominating in this early stage, you can rest assured Josh Allen, Lamar Jackson is going to be one of my nominations if they're not nominated already. And I want one of these quarterbacks in an ideal world. I'm not trying to sit here and tell you that Lamar Jackson is going to be bad for your auction team. I want Lamar Jackson on my team, but the activity of the room is going to dictate how I approach this. Building your auction team, guys, on values is a good way to suck in an auction league, okay? If you just draft all values, your team's going to be incredibly mediocre. But in a quarterback position, in a 1 quarterback league, I am going to guarantee you, this is my personal guarantee. It is hard to guarantee anything about an auction league, but I will guarantee you this. You will get value at the quarterback position. And I'm going to explain it to you why. I am not going to spend more than $20 on a 1 quarterback in a 1 quarterback league, the onesies, as Drew calls them. I'm not going to do it. But if everybody in that room is saying close to the same thing, oh, you know what? I know Lamar Jackson for $12 is way too cheap, but I want that $12 for my wide receiver 4 or that tight end that I'm targeting later. Then I'm going to draft Lamar Jackson for $12. But even if I don't get Lamar Jackson, the high-end quarterback market is not going to affect the low-end quarterback market. Just because Lamar Jackson or Jalen Hurts goes for $30 doesn't mean Matthew Stafford all of a sudden is going to go for $11. It's not going to happen. Stafford is going to be a $1 quarterback in every auction draft, $1 or $2, whatever, and the guys who get drafted around him, Tua, JJ McCarthy, Trevor Lawrence, whichever name you like in that range, those guys will be $1 quarterbacks. So I am going to get value at the quarterback position, whether people are playing chicken on the elite quarterbacks or in maybe even in an ideal world, they're spending $35 on Josh Allen. And I can just realize now that somebody took $35 out at a position where I know I'm going to be able to find good replacement value. So that is one of the strategies I'm going to have this year, because I actually think there's a lot of usable depth at quarterback.
Drew, you and I have this conversation every single year in Canton at the Kings Classic drafts at the Fantasy Football Expo. I always walk around and I do the Sirius XM broadcast of the draft. And then I walk over, I see Drew's room, and I look down at his sheet and I see his quarterback. And I think last year it may have been Matt Stafford, to be honest. But you always have like a $1, $2 quarterback, right? Because that's just how it happens. People they get excited for Lamar or Jaden Daniels. Is there a quarterback this year that you're saying, maybe I do want to spend a little bit of money on? Or do you have a $1 guy that you say, I really want to have this guy in my back pocket?
So let me start off by first saying 2 years ago I had Stafford. Last year, I want to talk about what Joe just said about quarterback chicken.
Mm.
You find yourself in a room of 14 analysts. There's a lot of quarterback chicken going on in an auction room at the Kings Classic. So I actually spent $20 on Jalen Hurts last year, and that was my last bid. But somebody said 19, and it got quiet. I'm like, I'll say 20. Like, I'm fine with that, and I got him. And I was like, I'm totally cool with that. That doesn't bother me to spend 20. Now I don't really want to spend 21, 22, 25, 28. That's not for me. But 20, I was like, all right, I'm getting double-digit rushing touchdowns for $20. I did that. However, yes, my strategy is very similar to Joe's. This is why I like coming on the show. Really, I'm just lapping up a whole hour of confirmation bias here. But I'm looking at guys like he mentioned a couple of them, but Jordan Love is a guy that sticks out to me as somebody, they threw the ball a little bit more than people want to believe when Love was actually healthy, which wasn't very long because he got hurt in the first game. But when he was in the lineup, they threw the ball more than people want to believe. So Love is one of them. Brock Purdy's a guy whose touchdown rate fell off a cliff last year. Generally, Kyle Shanahan offenses, the quarterbacks have a little bit of an elevated TD rate. So even guys like Jimmy Garoppolo, Nick Mullins, these guys are throwing 5 and 6% touchdown rates, which is not normal for those caliber of quarterbacks. So I think Brock Purdy could easily have a 6% TD rate this year and be a steal. So I'm looking at Jordan Love, Brock Purdy, and then the other guy's Dak Prescott. I did a mock draft the other night. I ended up with Purdy and Prescott for $3.
Yeah. Wow. Combined. Love it.
I mean, like, it's too easy. Like, just book it. I'm done.
I mean, honestly, if you're a beginning auction player and you don't understand like the way Drew and I are dancing around the room and saying, well, if they're playing chicken, then I'll draft them. Honestly, if you're a beginning auction player and you just want a nice piece of advice, do what Drew did. Don't even bother with the early round, the elite quarterbacks, because you will get that value. It is going to exist. Whether the elite quarterbacks go for $10 or the elite quarterbacks go for $40, you will get Dak Prescott, Jordan Love, Brock Purdy in that $1, $2, $3 tier. That is an absolute guarantee. I have never been in an auction where that wasn't the case, that at least one team got a starting quarterback for $1. It is going to happen.
All right, guys, welcome back. Rocking and rolling here with the great Drew Davenport at Drew Davenport FF on TikTok, Twitter, X, whatever you're calling it these days. Look at you on TikTok here. Like, aren't we old guys? Like, we're supposed to not do the TikTok thing, but you're experimenting here on TikTok now?
Yeah, well, I started the account a couple years ago, and then last summer I got so crushed I just dropped it. But the legal stuff is really a niche that I found people are starving for. So it's actually really easy to get followers on TikTok because you don't really have like an algorithm that you have to mess with. If you hate somebody's video, you just scroll past it. So people follow a lot easier on TikTok. So I'm actually the fantasy football lawyer on TikTok.
Okay. All right. Go give him a follow over there. Well, if you're following Drew, you're following Joe, you're following anybody in fantasy football this year, they're talking about the tight end position. And I want to know, guys, who am I going to take at tight end? Am I going to spend $25, $30 on Trey McBride or Brock Bowers at the top of the draft? Or can you wait a little while? Maybe my guy Turd Ferguson falls for like $5, $6, $7. Or do I just punt and go totally cheap and go, give me Brenton Strange and Kyle Pitts for $3 total? Let's start with you, Joe. What are you thinking about the tight end position this year?
Well, let's liken it to the quarterback conversation a little bit. It's kind of similar, except I'm going to be much more willing, I think, to spend up on Brock Bowers or Trey McBride, just because I think of how incredibly outsized their advantage is. But let me tell you something. If Brock Bowers is getting bid in the $20 range, Drake, not to call you out, I'm in, baby. It ain't happening. He's going to be a $35, $40, $45 player. He's going to be – those guys are typically going to be priced. At least like when Gronk was dominating and then Kelsey was dominating, those guys were priced right along with like the back end of the wide receiver 1 tier. And it's really up to you whether or not you're comfortable paying that. I would say in a typical year, I'm not comfortable paying that. It's not for me. Ryan Heath has a wonderful article up at FantasyPoints about the Bowers versus McBride debate, and his assertion was neither. Just in terms of cost, I guess you can apply that to auction strategy as well. But the first guy who I think I'm going to be really being interested in, because I think he's in a separate tier. I think people are going to view Bowers and McBride as in a tier unto their own, and then a guy who's in a tier on his own is George Kittle, and I wonder what his price is going to be. We have him as a $20 to $25 player in PPR on the tight end cheat sheet. That is a price I am very, very excited to pay if George Kittle goes for that. If not, I'm probably going to dumpster dive with like Hunter Henry, Brenton Strange, maybe the rookies like Colston Loveland. I'm not that into Tyler Warren. I don't think he'll get a lot of volume, but I'm interested to see what Brock Bowers and Trey McBride go for, Drew. But I think like in years past, it's a personal preference. Dabbling in the elite tight end market, if you don't have tight end premium, is probably not going to be for me.
I think I'm with you. And the elite tight end thing really comes down to the times that I've tried it and spent some more money on that position. I don't like my builds when I finish the draft. And I always feel like it costs me and I have some hole somewhere else that I really don't like. So I've pretty much given up on the top tight end thing. But like we talked about with the quarterbacks, if I see a value that's hitting me in the face, the bidding starts slowing down in the upper teens for George Kittle, like I'm going to jump in there. But for the most part, I just don't see it happening this year with those three top guys. And one of the things that I've isolated over the last couple of years is that I know that in snake drafts, taking the mid-round tight end is not always a very profitable move. But what I've said about auction drafts is that it's different, because in the mid rounds, when you're taking a tight end in a snake, there's opportunity cost there. You're not drafting another running back or wide receiver that can really help your team because you had to go take David Njoku. But in an auction, you can budget to do both. So I'm okay with spending a few more dollars. Like at quarterback, I'm just going to go $1, $2, like I said before. But in tight end, I'm okay just spending a few bucks. Njoku, Ingram, Ferguson, just those kind of guys. I don't want it to be a lot. I want to take two guys and I want to spend like maybe $8 total, $10 total. That's really my max, $8 or $10 total. And hey, if that doesn't work, if I nominate Njoku and he's up at 11, like I don't care. That stuff that's not going to be that important. What's most important to me is that I have the ability to take a shot on those guys because it doesn't shut me out of other players like it would in a serpentine draft.
That's such a good point, because what you said, you hit the nail on the head. Hey, I want to take, like you said, a David Njoku or Travis Kelce, whatever, in like the 5th round. Yeah, now I just lost out and I can't take DJ Moore. So now I've got a hole at wide receiver. You can take the next player in an auction. There's no rule against that. You won David Njoku, boom. Now you just got DJ Moore with the next pick. So love that. Great stuff there. Let's see. I want to go circle back now to that wide receiver position, guys, where it's deep. Okay. You've got the high end guys who are very, very high. We're talking Jamar Chase, Justin Jefferson, Lamb, Neighbors, Thomas, you name it. But I think in an auction, especially 10, 12 person neighborhood league, there's so much value to be had. So I wanted to pick your brain on maybe some of these $5 to $10 players that you're just kind of keeping in the back of your mind. And you're saying, maybe Jawan Jennings, a name that pops up because he's recently been in the news with his contract situation, or Chris Godwin, who there's some debate on his health. But Joe, let me start with you. Are there any kind of mid-range guys at wide receiver who you're just like, I want him on my roster this year because I know I can get him for a value?
Yeah, Darnell Mooney's been a guy I've been really hammering just because you look at the numbers that he produced last year when both he and Drake London were healthy. And I know there's different things going on because of the numbers London put up with Michael Penix, but they are way closer together than their ADPs or their auction values would suggest at this point. He's been a guy I've drafted quite a bit of. Cedric Tillman's another. He had a 3-week stretch over the middle of the season. By the way, that's a time period known as a fulgum. You know how 2 weeks is a fortnight, 3 weeks is a fulgum.
A
3
Travis
week
Fulgham?
stretch, yes, a 3 week stretch where somebody produces as the number one overall player at a position is a fulgum. So for the fulgum from week 7 through 9, Cedric Tillman was actually the number one wide receiver in fantasy football. He's been a guy I've been targeting, but this is just all this is back to tiers in general, right? Knowing the players in this tier that I'm going to be in on. You have to understand the average fantasy player is smart now. And if they're doing an auction, not to say that me, Drake, and Drew aren't complete bobbleheads sitting here yucking it up, but like I feel like if you're doing an auction, you're probably more into fantasy football than the average Joe is who's doing a water cooler league over at the office. So this is where you got to be smart, because what I've found out is if you're doing an auction with people, they've printed out cheat sheets. It might not be a Fantasy Points one. It might be a Football Guys one, Fantasy Pro, whatever website you want to say. They've probably printed out a cheat sheet. And invariably, every draft, that sleeper everybody wants in like the 11th round of nominations is the same guy everybody's saving up their money for. So don't think you're going to outsmart everybody. And that's why in the middle of your draft, there's something I call the hammer. That's the person who has the most money. And the hammer's team could be good. The hammer's team could suck. It doesn't matter. If you have the most money, you can throw that money around. So you have to be very cognizant. It's like at a poker table. Who's got the chips? Who has the ability to make a reckless bet or a reckless bluff? You have to understand where people are in their position. And that's not understanding just how much money they have, Drake and Drew. It's understanding what roster positions they need. And if you're in a snake draft, you really only pay attention, I think, to who needs what at what position if you're really near or at the turn. I can wait to draft my quarterback until my next pick because the guys in between me already have one. That's not the case in an auction. Because if everybody, if you see 4 teams that definitely need a wide receiver 2, and you need one as well, you can be damn sure they're going to be in the same bidding war that you are in. So you have to know who has the most money, who's got the ability to outbid you for those players. And that's why you want to attack those tiers. And those tiers, fortunately, guys, the tier 1, tier 2, those tiers are a lot narrower than tiers 3, tiers 4, tiers 5. That's self-evident. There's fewer elite players than there are good players. So that's why you still want to be proactive in saying, all right, you know what? I might prefer Devontae Smith straight up to Jordan Addison. Let's just throw an example out there. I've actually drafted a lot of Jordan Addison. I know there's legal issues there as well. But let's just throw that out as an example. I prefer Devontae Smith straight up to Jordan Addison. But Jordan Addison got nominated first, and I have him really only 2 spots behind Devontae Smith. Let me get in on the bidding there, so I know I'm not going to be left out in the cold for that player that I want. That allows you to stay ahead of the room a little bit. And just to wrap it all up with this like kind of wide receiver sleeper conversation, Drake, don't presume you're smarter than everybody else in the room, because I guarantee you at least once the guy you're saving your money for, at least 2 other people in the room are saving their money for that guy as well.
There's 20 guys in the draft who are all sitting there going, I'm getting George Pickens this year. He's going to blow up in Dallas. What do you think, Drew? Any wide receiver thoughts from you?
Yeah, I got quite a few, but I will say that first of all, Mooney is certainly on my list. I hope I'm not paying $10 for Mooney though. That may happen by the time August rolls around, but I'm hoping I'm paying more like 4 to 6 for Mooney. But
that's the hope, right? Not to interrupt,
right,
Drew,
sure.
which I did, but like you also have to understand that like some guys' value is just going to get boosted up because if he's the last guy in a tier, he's going to go for $13 when he should have gone for 7, right? Like so that's one of the things about not being strict with an auction value sheet, right? Because you are going to have to outbid people at some point for the last guy in a tier towards the back end of your draft.
Yeah. Yep. And, another guy, Drake, you actually mentioned him in the lead-in, was Chris Godwin. I understand the injury. I get all of the things surrounding Godwin this year with the rookie coming in and they lose Liam Cohen. Now they've lost 2 offensive minds, 2 years in a row now. But Chris Godwin was the wide receiver 2 when he went down last year. I'm willing to take a chance. The thing is, it's cheap enough, and that's why I'm interested. I wouldn't be interested if he was still being drafted as a wide receiver too, but it's cheap enough at this point that you can afford to take him as like a wide receiver 4 and just stick him on your bench for 4 or 5, 6 weeks while he works his way into shape. And hopefully you have him for the back half of the season when he's healthy. Another guy is Teddy McMillan. I'm surprised at how cheap he is right now. I think that Football Guys ADP has him as coming off the board as a wide receiver 29. I feel like I can get him for 12, $15 maybe. Now, there may be somebody in every auction room that loves McMillan, and maybe that's not going to happen. So, to speaking to Joe's point, maybe I think I'm smarter than I am. But, wide receiver 29 right now says the market's kind of cool on him. And I don't understand that. For a guy with his draft capital, for an offense that made a lot of strides at the end of last year, he's somebody I'm looking at as well. And then there was one more. Calvin Ridley's interesting to me. I don't think he's had that great a quarterback play since he's been in Tennessee. And I feel like it's the quietest offseason for a number one pick in a long time at quarterback. We have not talked at all about what's happening in Tennessee.
They didn't even talk about him when he got drafted, Drew, because they were so focused on Shadur Sanders that, you know what, Calvin Ridley's a great name, because if Calvin Ridley, hell, let me spot him 3 games. If he misses 3 games only, he's like 100% to lead that team in targets.
Yeah.
Who else is taking targets from him?
And why is he wide receiver 33 or something like that right now? I mean, I feel like there's so many guys, and I'm really hoping when I get in there, the reality is that I don't have to care which one of these guys I get. I can just grab 2 of them. Even the San Francisco guys, I know we're talking about Jawan Jennings, but him or Pearsall, like one of these guys is going to be too cheap. I'm hoping to grab like 2, 3 of these guys and just hammer the 4, 5, 6 spots. And there's all kinds of upside there to swing into your lineup.
To call back to the Calvin Ridley tier that Drew was talking about, also, this is the Tetairo McMillan tier. I think my most drafted kind of like mid-early round receiver, which I would consider 4th, 5th round, and I would consider this like the $20 to $30 range wide receiver, is Jaylen Waddle. And you have to look at a couple of things. Tyreek Hill is a year older, coming off another injury. Now, Tyreek Hill could have a great year. I'm not denying that. But I also think the Dolphins defense is going to absolutely suck. Their edge rushers are coming off of injuries. I know they got Minkah Fitzpatrick back in the deal, but I think at best Minkah Fitzpatrick is a slight upgrade on Jalen Ramsey. So I am down on the Dolphins in general, but I actually think they might be throwing the ball a lot. So I really like Jaylen Waddle. He's like discount Tyreek Hill at this point. He's going to be a player who I think will be. He's great because he's a guy who, if you can go robust wide receiver and get 2 guys above Jaylen Waddle, whose ADP is in the same range, and Jaylen Waddle can be your 3rd for like $25, or let's just say you got involved in like the Bijan Robinson bidding, and you're like, well, I'm going to have to go a little bit cheaper at receiver. Jaylen Waddle can be kind of like a lower end 1A, 1B paired with somebody like a Calvin Ridley, if that's the kind of build that you want to go with. So he's a guy, Drake, I have drafted a lot of and will be a linchpin player for me.
I'll give you my kind of sleeper, I guess, if you want to call it, wide receiver, and it's Mr. Cardi B, Stefon Diggs. I know he's coming off the injury, but we've seen video, looks very healthy in camp running around. There's nobody else on this Patriots team. Now, remember, there's adults in the room now actually calling plays in New England. So
is that what you call Josh McDaniels?
Yes, because I'm taller than he is, but he might have me on the better hair. But here's the problem with the Patriots. It's who's behind him. Kyle Williams. Pop Douglas. There's a whole lot of nothing going on here. And everyone's in on Drake May. Oh, Drake May is going to be great. This team's improving. I've said on record with the Guru, Patriots are the 2nd best team in that division already. If they are, don't they have to throw the ball to somebody? And Stefon Diggs is a guy who a few years ago was like a fringe 1st-round pick. And now you can get him for literally a whopper wrapper at this point. So that's my guy. Joe, we're going to get to the end of the draft here, and I know it's something that weighs heavily on you, and you want to tell our audience how to really close well in an auction scenario so they don't miss the boat and they're not left kind of holding the bag. And I've been there before where you leave the draft, you're like, oh my God, I have $8 left.
Yeah, all right. So there's a couple of things here that you can really do that can mess up the end of your draft. Number one is if you went stars and scrubs and spent all your money early. Now, that is a viable strategy. The problem with stars and scrubs is you have to pick the right players. And predicting 4 guys who are not going to get hurt in an NFL season is a really, really difficult task. I've actually been in a draft where somebody who went stars and scrubs fell asleep during the draft, and then
What?
we were like, hey, Nate needs a quarterback, what is he doing? And like, no, he was asleep. So make sure you don't do that. Make sure you don't drink too much and knock yourself out. But there are a couple things around at the end of the draft that I want to reiterate for people. Do not, never, ever, 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 unless it's your last roster spot and you have $2 or $3 left off, spend more than $1 for a kicker or defense. Don't do it. I mean, because that money, that extra dollar, you will be shocked how many players that could have helped you get that are like, oh, I can't believe that guy is a $2 guy. Those guys will exist, and they're going to exist for a couple of reasons. Number one, I mentioned earlier that not only do you have a finite budget, but there is a second kind of currency in an auction draft: your roster spots. And this is why it is so important, especially if you have just a few bucks left. You don't want to just bid on everybody because you might end up getting shrouded with somebody you don't want. And also, do not be afraid to spend your money. If, like Drake, you said, that is the biggest sin of an auction draft.
Oh, it was terrible.
Absolute
I
biggest
was
sin.
sick to my stomach.
Because, like, if you leave $8 over, I want you to recommend, if this happens to you, go back and look at your auction draft, go look at the draft log and look at the players who went for $8 in your it's going to make you sick like that. So make sure there is no reason to be saving $40 until the last 3 rounds of nominations. It's not going to happen. But one other quality of life tip that I have to throw out there: when you're down to your last 2 or 3 roster spots, never, ever get caught in a position where you can't make your maximum bid on a player you really want. So not only do you want to be aware of the hammer, who I had mentioned, and how much that player can spend, but you also want to be aware of what everyone's maximum bid is and how many roster spots they have left. Let me throw an example out to you. Hunter Henry's a player I like, Drake. I actually like him at cost more than Stefon Diggs. Let's say you have 2 roster spots and $4 to spend, and Hunter Henry's out there. You really want him because you opted not to pay up for a top tier tight end, which Drew and I argued earlier. You need that cheap league winning upside for Drake May. And your league mate, who has $3 left to spend on one roster spot, nominates Hunter Henry for $1. You immediately top that bid with a bump to $2. But your opponent, who has $3 left, is able to top that bid. Even though you had $4 left, you put yourself in a position where you couldn't top a $3 bid because you needed to fill 2 roster spots. That's the key. Most auction software will not let you fill a roster spot for $0. You need to have $1 left to fill your last roster spot. So if your maximum bid on a player you really want is $3, that needs to be your first bid for that player. And if somebody tops that, so be it. But that is a really good way to screw yourself because in most auction software, you cannot fill a roster spot without having $1 at the end. So be aware of that. It will charge you $1 to fill your last roster spot. So if somebody matches your top bid, you can't top that bid. And that's a good way to lose out on a really good player. So just be very aware of where you're at, what other people's maximum bids are, what positions those people need, because that's going to dictate how you need to spend your money.
Excellent stuff. You know, a couple things occurred to me there. A different way of saying something that you just said is, a lot of times what I start to do late in an auction is I start to aim my nominations at certain managers in the room. I say, this guy's got too much money. I'm going to aim a nomination. He's waiting on this guy. Or this guy is going to be in competition with me for the last starting quarterback. So I'm going to throw this person out. But the chief problem that people have, the cardinal sin, is nominating a guy for $1 and then nobody else bids because you thought they were going to spend $2, $3, $4, $5. You have to be pretty sure that when you nominate, you're going to get action on it. because as you said, the currency as you go in the draft becomes more about what space do I have to get the guys I want. And if you fill that space, you've really
Yeah.
hurt yourself. So when you nominate that $1 player, make sure you're going to hear a 2 first. Yeah.
Or make sure you're okay with getting that player.
Right.
Yes.
Like early in the draft, like you mentioned, Drew, early in the draft, you can nominate a big name player. Like, for instance, let's say I got Bijan Robinson and I know Ashton Genty is going to get the piranhas swarming. Then I'll throw out Ashton Genty and I'll just watch the action. And I'll just be like, there you go, boys. There's your bloody chum, right? Like, go get him. I'm going to watch the money go out. But you're 100% right. Man, throwing a $1 bid out there for like a third tight end because you think this guy is going to be targeting that tight end and it's not the player you actually want, that you're going to expire that roster spot. And that's another way to leave money left over in your draft, which is not something you want to do.
Yeah.
And go ahead, Drew.
Yeah. Well, I was going to say the other thing too, a mistake a lot of people make is they see a player that they want that's still on the board and they say, I'm going to get that player. I've got the money, but they wait to nominate that player. And the problem with that is something that I alluded to at the very beginning, which is that player's renting cap space in your brain. So there are other players that are going to come up that you can roster for the back of your team or that are good values that you should be bidding on. But you're like, hey, I don't know. Let's say that you have Bijan and one of my leagues is super deep benches. So a lot of times people will draft, Algier with Bijan. And so if that's your move and you're like, I want to get Algier, well, it's only going to cost me $3 at the end of the draft and you're going to wait. Just do it now. Get it out there so you know what you're spending. Maybe it costs you $6. You got to know that. And rather than letting it rent space and kind of ruin the end of your draft as you're waiting on this player, just put him out there and see what it's going to cost you. Then you can go forward with the concrete knowledge. I've already got him. I have this much to spend. And another thing I'll comment on as far as kickers and Ds goes, I don't want anyone to use their kicker and D nominations unless they absolutely have to, because it is a perfect way to quote unquote waste around or punt around later in the draft. Because a lot of times you're going to be sitting there with like $12 and there's 2 players you want, and you need other players with 19 or 17 to spend some money. When it comes up to you, you don't want to nominate a player you want because they're going to get them. You can't beat their max. So that's the perfect time where you can call out the kicker. And if somebody takes them from you, fine. And if they don't, fine. You just got your kicker, but you wasted a round and you didn't have to put a player out there that you didn't want to put out there. So I always try to save my kicker and D for the end. Resist the urge to be like in the 4th round, be like Brandon Aubrey, I got the top kicker. Who cares? That is that's a waste of time. It's a waste of your nomination. Save that stuff for the end. It's going to help you at the end to have that flexibility to fill those spots when you want to wait.
One last thing that I wanted to bring up was if you get into a bidding war, make sure it's a bidding war. You're just driving the price up. We saw this last year, Drew, in the Kings Classic, where somebody was just driving up the price on a quarterback. They already had a quarterback, right? So now they ended up with 2 high-priced quarterbacks. So I think it was like Lamar and like Burrow or something like that. And
that's a mortal sin.
You can't do it.
It's a mortal sin in a snake draft. It's way worse in an auction draft. If you can only play one, of course. Oh, I'm just going to trade them later. Everybody knows you're bent over the barrel now. Like, what are they going to do? Are they going to trade you AJ Brown for your backup quarterback? It's not going to happen, man. Nope. It's not going to happen. So, like, that is the mortal sin. If you get your quarterback, all right, and let's just say for the sake of purposes, it's one of like the top 5 quarterbacks. Like if you have Matthew Stafford for $1 and Lamar Jackson hasn't come up for nomination yet, and you get in a bidding war for Lamar Jackson, I wouldn't do it. But all right, at least you know you got an elite quarterback. I'm talking, and you mentioned Drake. If it's 2 of the elite high-priced quarterbacks, that's the mortal sin.
He didn't want to see. It was like, let's say it was Burrow. So we already had Lamar, and then Burrow's going for like $10 and like going once.
Oh, what?
Going to, and he was like, he's like, I can't let somebody get the quarterback for this price. And he's like, the hell with it, 11, and he throws it out there, and then all of a sudden now you have multiple guys. So
yeah, that's
you
a
can't
mortal
price
sin.
and force if you
You
can't take the
you
player.
cannot do that, right? Like if somebody else in your auction gets a value, but that value wouldn't help you, so be it. Clap your hands, move on to the next nomination. Like I said, you can't count on values to build your team, because if you do, your team is going to absolutely suck. That will happen.
Drew, any final thoughts here from the folks before they get done with this show and then they go check out the Auction Brief podcast? You've had some great guests over the course of summer. Marcus Grant, JJ Zacharyson. I hear later in the summer you've got some Eagles fan who does a Fantasy Points podcast coming on. But yeah, any final thoughts here?
No, the only thing I would say is paying attention to what's going on around you in an auction is such an underrated skill. And everyone thinks, oh, well, that's your advice. Pay attention. Yeah, that's my advice. Like it's a skill. I promise you it's a skill, because you can tune out when you're in a snake draft. You can't tune out in an auction ever. And so that is a skill, sitting there for 3 hours and being engaged and on top of what's going on. And when I say on top of it, Joe made a great point about like, well, I bid 2 and then this guy said 3 and I couldn't bid 4. You have to know that stuff before it happens. And knowing that stuff before it happens, that's what makes a great auction player. And if you want to be great, then you can't blow off things like, hey, pay attention and stay engaged, because that is the game. And that's what makes auction players great.
I love that, because now people are so interested in their phones and they're scrolling and they're like, oh, I just missed, 2 players because I was on TikTok looking up the fantasy football lawyer. So
you have to be able to bring your laptop to the can with you guys. I mean, like, it's going to happen. If your commissioner isn't going to let you take a break, make sure you're sitting it on the sink there while we're taking a leak. That's the way it goes with auctions, baby.
And turn your camera off.
Yes, please. Yes, please.
All right. Well, hey, make sure, folks, you go over and give our guy Drew a follow on Twitter, X, whatever they're calling it this week, at Drew Davenport FF, on TikTok at the Fantasy Football Lawyer. Go check out his great podcast, The Auction Brief. And Dolan, what do you got going on? Anything you need to promote for the end of the year here?
Well, by the time you listen to this, my 2025 auction draft plan, which is going to have my strategy laid out, will be available on fantasypoints.com. We've got the auction cheat sheets. We have both redraft, and we have 1 PPR, we have half PPR, and we have Superflex 1 PPR auction cheat sheets with suggested values, guys, but you don't want to be held rigid to those. We have an interactive auction tool. And get in our Discord if you've never been in an auction or salary cap league. Ask around. I know our guy Matt Donnelly loves doles out advice on those as well. So no, it's a lot of fun. It's a great time to join Fantasy Points. And I will hopefully be back well refreshed and not too hungover from seeing the Gallagher brothers.
I can't wait to hear the story. That'll be.
I just have to say, awesome, dude. I love Oasis. I can't believe you're getting to do that. I am seriously jealous about that.
Yeah, I told my wife 15 years ago that if they ever got back together, we're going to England to see them, and it's time to pay that check. It was an expensive check, but we're going. Awesome. It's going to be fun. It's going to be a lot of fun. We got floor seats, so like we get to hang out with the hooligans and the geezers there, and I'm gonna go see our boy Murph and Lee Whittington. So
nice.
We're gonna go out to dinner.
Shout out to the 5-Yard Rush crew.
Yes, the 5-Yard Rush crew will be seeing those. So I appreciate that that those guys are going to be there to show us around.
Well, if you want to win any more money, just make sure you're subscribed to fantasypoints.com, and maybe your auction draft this year will be much more fruitful. So for Joe Dolan and Drew Davenport, I'm Brian Drake. We'll see you guys next time for Fantasy Football Daily.